I want to talk about the application framework for your projects and how to use it and how to get started. If at this point you should be done or very close to done, maybe not 100% done, but done to the point where you want to start coding some Python with your database. All right, so you've got your database schema, either fully or partially worked out, and you've got your database scripts. Okay, so now you want to start working on your Python project. So what you should have done, and we went over this in class, is to create your repository for your project. All right, so I'm going to create a repository in my GitHub account that represents, like, your project, right? Like if you're working on your project, your project name will obviously be different, right? Where do you get your project name from? You get it from the project, right? That we handed out in class. Okay. So, all right. So you're in your repository, okay, and you can take a look. You go to your repository. This is the overview page, right, for your GitHub account, and you just click on New, right? So here's where you would start, right? So start by creating your repository, and I'm going to call it your project. Okay, so this would be your project, whatever the name of your project is, right? IT-566 semester project. Okay, you can choose the visibility. You can keep it, if you make it private, I won't be able to see it, but you probably want to keep it private and maybe grant me permission to look at it. I don't know. However, we work that out. Or you can just show me in class, right? Like I don't need to go into your repository, quite honestly. So, however, I think private repositories cost money, so that's a concern too, right? So, another thing about making it public is, well, as you work on this stuff, other students could possibly see it, but they'd have to know what your repository is. But your GitHub account can be like part of your resume, right? So if you've got a decent project to show off what you've done in school, then that can work in your favor, right? So it's up to you. I'll keep it public. All right. So add a README and add a git ignore, and come down here and just type Python to add a Python git ignore. And the purpose of the git ignore is to ignore certain files in your repo so you don't post stuff, and you want to do that for like anything that contains passwords, etc., etc. You don't have to put a license. And then create your repository. Okay, for your project. So now this represents your project repository. So what you want to do then is you want to clone. Okay, so you should have your SSH keys all set up. You want to clone your repo to your local machine. Okay, so the way that you do that is you copy this URL to your Git repo, to your GitHub repo, and then go to your console and go to your dev folder, and wherever you put your projects. So I got a bunch of folders in here, right? So I'm going to go to cd dev.project. Sorry. .python. There we go. Okay, so I've got a projects folder in here. I'll just put it here at this level. Oh, no, I'll go to projects. All right, so I've got 2 in there already, so I'm just going to go git clone. All right, so now if you do a dir or a ls, you're going to have your project cloned. So you're going to want to, you can go in there to your project, okay, take a look at it. So it should have a Git, a Git. And if you launch Visual Studio Code, then this is what it should look like. Let me bring this over and shrink it down a little bit. All right, so you see here, close that window, you've got your git ignore and your readme, okay? Your git directory, it doesn't show up. All right, so your readme will just have the title of the project, okay? And that's fine. Now, I'll move this out of the way. The next thing that you want to do is then you want to copy the app framework to your project directory. Now the way that you do that is you go to my GitHub account, right? Which is github.com/pulpfreepress, and that'll take you to the overview page. Okay, and then you come down here to IT-566 Project App Framework. Click there, and you wanna clone this, but in a different location, right? You don't want to clone it in your project. You want to clone it someplace else on your hard drive, right? So code, copy that URL, and then go to your console. All right, so then move out of your project and clone it here, right? You clone it wherever you want, right? I'm going to clone it in my projects folder, okay? Because it'll just be in the same folder as the project that you're working on. So git clone, and then paste that URL in, hit return. So now if we take a look at the projects folder, you've got your project and you've got the IT-566 Project App Framework. All right, so now what you want to do is, let's take a look. So we're going to change directory into IT-566 App Framework. And it's the contents of this folder. You don't want to clone all this stuff, because if you do, you're going to wipe out your git ignore, etc., and your readme. You want to copy the contents of this. You don't want to copy the entire folder. You just want to copy the contents, right? So let's go into it and take a look at the app framework. So we've got an app settings.json, a config folder, a pip file, and a source directory. Okay. So what we can do is we can, I prefer to do it this way. I'm going to change directory, 2 levels up to my projects folder, cd to the project that you're working on, and then cp-r. No, you don't want to copy the whole directory, right? You want to copy, all right, 2 levels up, let's do this, IT framework, app framework, right? And then star. All right, so we're going to bring, and I think we need to do this because there are some directories in there. So we're going to have to say -r. All right. So this gives you some good workout with your bash commands. So navigate to your project directory and then copy source target, right? So you're going to copy everything that's in the app framework folder to your current directory. Okay, that's what that dot is. Check, measure 3 times, cut once, right? So you want to make sure you got this right. Hit return, and then you can check, do a dir. Now, just to review, right? I'm on Mac. This is a bash terminal, and I've got an alias. So when I say dir, I'm actually doing an ls-al, right? It's equivalent. Well, because I got the alias. Okay. So now your project folder should look like this. It should have app settings. Besides the .git, ignore, and the README, it should have the app settings, config, pip file, and source. At this point, Okay, now if you've been working on database scripts, you may have already set up this project, right? But I just want to let you know that you don't want the entire app config app framework folder. You just want the contents of that folder copied into your project directory. Okay, at this point, you could copy, you could add your database scripts to this, right? So at this point, you could say make dir database. Okay, and then I'm going to copy in some scripts from, let's see, I'm going to go CP, and I'm going to start with my root drive, right? I'm going to say CP. You're not going to do this because you won't have this. But what I'm trying to do, what I want you to do is then make a database directory in your project folder, copy in your database scripts and whatever you've worked on, okay? Because you're going to put those locally to your project folder, essentially, right? So I'm going to go dev/dev.books/cst with Python, CHAPT chapter 24 / employee training. I'm going to use employee training as an example. Database star. Well, actually, okay, so everything in the database, right? And because there is subdirectories in here, I'm going to add a -r. Right? Anytime you're copying directories, right, you want to, I'm not copying the database directory. I could have done that, right, because it's just database, but I'm just going to copy everything that's in that database directory to here /database, right, and hit return. Now we can do a tree if you've got that command installed, and that's what my database looks like. Okay, I've got a database folder with a DB version 1. You may not have that because we haven't talked about that yet, but I've got my database scripts and I've got a bash script called initialize database, right? So if now at this point, I'm assuming that your database scripts are working, right? You know how to execute them. So for example, so I get to that in a second. Then you want to make sure that you've got your MAMP on. You got your database on, right? Because there's nothing quite as startling as trying to run your database scripts when you have forgotten to turn on your database, right? So I'm going to start the database. Okay, move that out of the way. And then here I can go to the database folder. This would be your project's database folder. And I'm going to navigate to my DB version 1 because that's where my scripts are at. And I'm going to say MySQL redirect drop database. Okay, so that drops my database, and then everything should run fine. And then I'm going to run MySQL drop user, because I got a drop user script in this one. MySQL create database. Then create tables. Let's do a dir. Drop user, we got to create tables. We can do insert test data. Insert test data. Okay. And then create user. Now you could do the create user at any point after you've created the database, of course. Create user. All right, now you need a database user, right, for your application, and that's why I want to show you how to do that. Okay, so once you've got this, then you should be able to go into MySQL, and you should be able to show databases. And like I've just created the employee training database, so that's right there. And exit out of there. You could also do queries if you inserted test data, but this is fine. I've got my database user and my database created. At this point, you want to navigate back up to your project's root directory and launch Visual Studio Code. Okay, let me bring that over because I put it on a different other window. All right, so now in order to, so we've got the database running. You've created the database with your scripts, etc., right? And you have this config. So when you launch the app, I'm going to show you how to do that here in a second. You're going to have to put the name of the database, right? So the database, in my case, name is employee training, right? And when I did show databases, that's what it showed, right? Now the user, I know what I created, and you should too, because you're the one who's creating the user, is employee training underscore user. That's my database user. And my host is localhost, okay? And the port, now I'm running on a Mac, so my port is 8889, but if you are on Windows, then it's going to be 3306, and in Linux. All right, so Windows and Linux, it's usually 3306, but I'm going to leave it 8889 because I'm on a Mac, and I'm going to save it. The other thing you want to change in this config script, okay, let me just save this so far, is right here, right? We're going to get to this here in a second, in the source directory, whatever the name of your project is, you want to change this directory name to your project name, right? And also too, your app name will be your project name. And then log prefix will be, see how I've got an underscore in the log prefix, right? So your project, okay? And then you can leave the version, whatever you want. This is metadata, but this metadata is used for the logs. And then for the database pool, right, technically you could leave this, right? But I'm going to say your project, okay? Now, like I say, if your project is a photographer albums, right? Then whatever you've named your project, that's what you want your database pool name to be, just for continuity, right? So your project, your project, your project. You can leave this the same. You could leave use pure. If you're on a Mac, that could be false, but on Windows 11, I think that has to be true. And I have a whole video, I think, on that. Or I covered it in class. Okay, and this is because when you try to create the connection pool using the MySQL-connector.python package, the C binaries conflict on Windows for whatever reason, but they seem to work fine on Mac and on Linux. Okay, but most importantly, right, like even if you left all that the same as when you got it, it would still work. Okay, just when you go into your logs. Now the other thing you're going to have to do, speaking about logs, is you're going to have to create a new folder at your project level. So select your project, create a new folder, and name it logs, like that. Okay, it put it under configs. Let me delete that. Delete, move to trash. I don't want it there. Let me just do it in the console. It's easier. Okay. Sometimes Visual Studio Code just has a mind of its own. So you're in your project folder, dir. So make dir logs. All right, so dir. So now we have a logs directory. Okay. We got your database, your config, and then your config file. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is this pip file. This pip file has the required packages for the project. Okay, so let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Save your config file if you've made these changes, and go to pip file. Now, here's what I want you to check, right? The package, the only one required package at this point, you may add more later, is MySQL connector Python, any version. It'll load the latest here, right? It requires Python version 3.12. Now that's what I used, right? You may not have 3.12 loaded. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to do this. You want to go to your terminal and you want to type, I'm going to clear the screen, so Python 3 on a Mac, version. Okay, and I've got 3.13.7. Okay, I don't care much about the 0.7, but Python 3.13. So I'm going to go to, I also probably have Python 3.12 installed. I've got many different versions of Python, but 3.13 is the active global Python. All right, so I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code in my pip file, and I'm going to change this to 3.13. Then, once you've done that and you've saved that pip file, and this Python version is the same as your global version, then what you want to do is you want to go to your terminal and you want to type pipiv, should be installed, pipiv install. And you have to read that chapter on pipiv and how to make sure that you've got it configured correctly. And then it will install, it will create the virtual environment. So clear the screen. Now we should have this hidden file, or hidden directory, venv. Okay. Now, to run the project, which is, let me show you how to do that. Go back to Visual Studio Code. All right. Let me close the pip file. Oh, when you create the project, it will create this pip file.lock. When you install with pipiv install, it will create this pip file.lock. So that's where that comes from, and it's just all the versions of the installed packages that have been installed for your particular virtual environment. All right. So let's take a look at the source, right? So application name. So I'm gonna show you why you want to change this. Well, you don't, like I said, you want to make this the same name. Is it absolutely required that you do it? I want you to do it, right? Because I want you to understand what the relationship is between this package name and the imports in these other packages. All right. So I'm going to change this. Now, if you do it smartly, I think you could do rename, and everywhere that this application underscore name is referenced, okay, in the other packages. Well, let me do this before I rename this. Let me escape. At this point, you should be able to test this application. Okay, you got your database configured. All right. Let's go into, before we make any other changes, let's go into the source, this package application name. We've got the persistence layer. We need to go to the MySQL persistence wrapper. You want to scroll down, and right here on lines 32 and 33, you want to uncomment that this is the line that actually creates your, it calls this underscore initialize database connection pool. Okay. And now that you've got your database connection configured in your configuration file, it's going to call this method. All right. Using those configuration settings, right? Like database, pool name, pool size, and then the config stuff is created right here. You got database connection user, database connection host, database connection port. That's all coming from the configuration file. All right. So at this point, make sure you save that, uncommenting this line, these lines, and then to run this program, go back to your console and type pipiv run Python source/main. Okay, that's the entry point, and then point it to the configuration file. So you're in your root, you're in your project directory, pipiv run Python source/main.py, and then there's a switch for this main. I'll show you how that works here in a second. And then config slash application name. That's another, you should change the name of that config file too, right? But we haven't done that yet. We just want to test the app and then hit return. So if you see this, right, it works from the persistence wrapper. That's a debug statement. And then persistence wrapper, it's printing out the configuration settings for the database, and then creating the connection pool. And then you'll get this message, initialize. So in this initialize database connection pool method, connection pool successfully created. And then in the app services class, it says it works. In the user interface, it says it works. This is the user interface class. And then in the start method, user interface started. Okay, if you see that, everything works great at this point, right? And you're ready to proceed. So the first thing that I recommend you do is go back to Visual Studio Code, all right? And then click on this directory here, right click, and do rename, and then name it to your project. Hit return, okay? And what it will do is it should go and refactor. Well, it didn't do it. Maybe if I chose refactor, it would have done it. But everywhere that you see application name in these files, right, you want to change it to your project. You know. Now this is the name of your project, not necessarily your project, right? It's the name of your project, okay? So you just look at each file. There is a faster way, but anyway, let's see here, presentation. Okay, so I'm just going to go through each one of these, presentation layer. So your project. I'll speed this section up. You could also do like a search, I believe. Your project. Make sure you save. All right, service layer. Same thing. App services, your project. Your project. It's good to go in here and open these files because we're going to be taking a look anyway. Your project. Save. Application base. Your project. And then your project. Okay. Save that. Logging. Your project. Save. Settings. Settings is pretty much on its own. Main. Your project. All right. Alrighty, so now that you've done that, how do you test to make sure you got everything changed? You can just go to your console and run it again. All right, so it works. Now you run this command so many times that you might as well just copy that command and create a run script. So you're in your root project directory. You can say, let's go to Visual Studio Code, right? Because we got it open, and new file. Okay, run.sh, and then we're going to paste that. We'll do this. I'm going to say /shebang, which is shebang bin/bash, and then paste that command in. Okay, this is probably not strictly necessary, but we're going to run this command by using this run script. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the terminal, and we're going to give this script execution privileges. So we're going to say chmod chmod plus x run.sh. And now we can say /run, and it will execute. All right. So you've changed the name of your app to your project name. You've got the project running. It's making the database connection successfully. And that is a great place to be. And at this point, you're ready to start using the app framework. So in the next video, I will talk about like how the app framework works. All right, and in the functionality that it gives you and where you should start filling in your code to get the project going. Okay, hope this helped.